Discussion. I want to thank you all for joining us today for the first webinar of the EFI Foundation's Energy Jobs webinar series, where we will be covering how different regions across the United States have fostered innovation and job creation amidst the clean energy transition. Today, we will be focusing on how the Midwest has become a success story for the creation of clean energy jobs, while featuring discussion with accomplished policymakers, union leaders, and industry executives. And we will now begin with opening remarks from CEO of the EFI Foundation, Ernest Moniz.
Okay, well, thank you, Adam. And thank you. Let me add my own thanks to all of you for joining in with us. We at the EFI Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing solutions to climate change, the need for a clean energy transition, but doing so as part of one conversation involving as well energy security and social equity, where the latter specifically includes paying attention to the needs and the opportunities for workers and communities. In fact, we've had a strong relationship with labor for some years. We formed the Labor Energy Partnership a few years back and have executed a number of studies looking at the implications for jobs, for quality jobs, as particularly legislation such as the infrastructure law and the IRA, for example, are implemented. We did some predictions that over this decade, we would see the IRA by 2030 produce 1.5 million new jobs, increase GDP, and by the way, be consistent with lowering inflation, as we have seen back to pretty much normal levels by about this time. So today, what we're doing, as was indicated, we'd like to follow this up now with a series of place-based discussions in terms of how, at least at these early stages of BIL and IRA implementation, how we are doing. And Minnesota, from all that we see, is a great example of making some real progress, and that's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to start with a discussion with Cady Siebe, who is chair of the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, and Pete Wyckoff, Deputy Commissioner for Energy in the Minnesota Department of Commerce. You can read about them in much more detail, but I'd like to just jump into the conversation. Hi, Cady and Pete. Good to see you. Pete, I'm going to start with you. You were working in the United States Senate for some time. And of course, had a role in helping to craft that legislation that I referred to, the BIL or IIJA, the infrastructure law, and the Inflation Reduction Act. In fact, I do recall that our teams really had quite a bit of back and forth in those formative years, if you like, for getting that legislation successfully implemented. And our discussions really revolved very heavily around creating high-quality jobs. Well, now you're back at the state level, and why don't you give us your perspective, looking back now from the state level to your previous experience?
Yeah, thank you so much, Secretary Moniz, and it's good to see you again. And it was great to work with you and your team, particularly during the passage of the IRA. I've been back in Minnesota for 18 months now, and I'm pleased to report that the IRA and the IIJA are largely doing what they were designed to do, and that is to provide incentives to speed the clean energy transition, while onshoring supply chains needed to rebuild our manufacturing economy. These incentives are largely through tax credits, a traditional way to fund federal government contribution to energy work, but these are not your father's tax credits. The base credit is actually pretty low, lower than what we've been used to prior to the IRA, but the value of the credits, and this is the big development here, rise as projects contribute more and more social goods and ensure high quality jobs. This has been very useful in Minnesota thus far. I went from the legislative side to the implementation side, and like everyone else, I'm frustrated sometimes with how slowly the wheels of the federal government turn post passing a law. But things are coming along, and this is the things we're trying to do in the IRA are not things that are new to Minnesota, and Chair Siebe will really detail the work she and others have been doing long before I got here. There's a big bump in the tax credit value for projects paying good wages and utilizing registered apprentice labor, so that we're building the next generation workforce in a way that can work to support families and communities. The value rises even more when you're working in communities that already are dependent on fossil fuel jobs through the energy community portion of the tax credit. And if the projects use American-made components, that gives another adder bump. These are all to build out that and rebuild our manufacturing sector. And then finally, there's additional adders if you're serving low-income communities. So really, this is the first time that these sort of credits are tied to broader values, not just let's get more clean energy out there. We're going to talk mostly about the electric sector today, and I think that's probably where Chair Siebe will go in a second. But I want to point out that it's not all just electric sector. And it's really important that it's about manufacturing as well. In Minnesota, an existing solar factory in Mountain Iron up in the Iron Range has expanded dramatically because of the IRA tax credits. An electric bus manufacturer in St. Cloud is also seeing new work because of the IRA tax credits. We are getting a new solar factory near the Twin Cities. Again, IRA driven. We have an electrolyzer factory in Minnesota. There's no way that would have existed without the IRA. And next week, a bunch of us are going to a ribbon cutting for an iron-based magnet factory, the first new kind of magnet to be produced in the United States in years and years and years. That's again driven by the IRA. Another thing that's happening next week is a bunch of us are going up to northeastern Minnesota for the ribbon cutting at a new DOE-supported high voltage direct current transmission project. You're going to hear more about that today. And Minnesota Rural Electric Co-ops are also big winners of the new USDA IRA New Era program. All in all, we've pulled in over $3.5 billion for climate and clean energy work out of the IRA and IIJA in grants. So it's not just tax credits, and that just keeps going up and up. And I'll turn it to my colleague over at the PUC to kind of fill in about all the stuff Minnesota was already doing.
Well, that's great to hear. Certainly our modeling did indicate that a lot of that job creation was going to be in construction, in the power sector, and manufacturing, and we still have a ways to go to 2030, but sounds quite encouraging. Cady, I think we'll let's add your perspective here. You certainly have been both a legislator and now regulator, so I think you do have multiple perspectives to offer. Also, I think you have a well-earned reputation in terms of prioritizing community impact. So tell us about your motivations, your objectives, and what you are seeing on the ground. We just heard from Pete some pretty encouraging things. Maybe you can fill out those blanks.
Thank you, Secretary Moniz. It's a pleasure to join you here virtually today, and I appreciate the invitation from EFI as well. To build off what Deputy Commissioner Wyckoff said, in Minnesota, we really have prioritized local community impacts of the energy transition. And the main reason, I think, is very foundational, and it kind of goes back to what you said about why, what motivates me. We know that people care about the price that they pay for energy because it impacts so much of the rest of their lives. And so if we can help ensure that local voices are included in the energy transition, I think we are going to get to not only better outcomes for those local communities and workers, but it's also going to result in projects that fit the needs of the local community and help ensure a more affordable energy system overall. And so as a legislator, you mentioned I was a state legislator. Certainly we're very in tune with the voices of local communities. And when I was in both the State House and Senate, worked closely with many unions, to try to spur economic development and help workers improve their daily lives. And now as a regulator at the PUC, I think that one thing that's very foundational is that it's important to bring that local perspective into more of our decision making. And so I think a real prevalent example, a robust example that my colleagues and I worked on hard during the COVID pandemic was how do we help spur economic development, invest in the clean energy transition, and maintain affordable rates. And so what we did was ask our local utilities, and we have great utilities here in Minnesota on both the gas and electric side, to bring forward projects that do those things. And examples then were, we saw investment in utility scale solar projects that invested in the local economy, hired union workers to build these projects, and helped lower people's electricity rates. There's also a big effort for wind repowering that, again, really helped drive economic development at a time, during the midst of the COVID pandemic, where those jobs were really critical and needed. And so now we're building off of that commitment to local workers because of the good work that the Minnesota Department of Commerce, led by Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan as the head of the state government, they, working with the state legislature, passed in 2023 100% clean electricity law that now we, again, are, as state regulators, are helping to impact or to implement in a way that we hope and will continue to, I think, ask questions that lead to how are local communities impacted and how can the clean energy transition really help improve the lives of Minnesotans.
In our analyses, we did identify many things that are reflected, I think, in the legislation, project labor agreements, community benefits plans, prevailing wage requirements, obviously the tax credits, work for apprenticeships, et cetera. So for both of you, again, from your state-based perspective, what do you see as the principal tools that are really helping create the quality jobs? I mentioned some that are candidates, but what do you see on the ground as moving the needle? Either one of you can start. Cady, why don't you go first?
Okay, I'll go first. I think I touched on it in my first answer, and it's still really essential. First is transparency of the utility regulation process and inclusion of diverse voices that helps regulators make better decisions on the projects that are in front of them. So whether that means ensuring that local units of government, union workers' voices, other state agencies, tribal governments, environmental groups, ensuring that their voices are included in the regulatory process. It sounds so foundational, but it's actually quite surprising how much we have improved this over the past 6 or 7 years that I've been at the commission. We see much more engagement from local communities and from workers' voices in the energy transition. And I can't overemphasize how important that is for regulators to hear that if you are measuring and including the voices of workers in the energy transition in all sorts of different dockets, in our case, that's going to lead to better outcomes. So for example, we'll measure for success in service quality dockets. So if we see a particular utility needs to have perhaps more line workers in one area of the state, through those service quality dockets, we can then order, that they increase their number of workers in a particular service area. Or we have required our utilities now to file worker transition plans. So if you have a coal facility that is set to retire, what are the plans for the local workforce? So where are those workers who have been, working at a facility for the duration of it, for 50 years or whatever? We're not making the plan, but we want to ensure that the utility is working with the workers to say, what is the plan, so that those people have jobs after the coal facility is retired, and they can seek employment and continue to have a good wage in other areas of that electric utility or the gas utility.
Those plans, Cady, would include retraining programs and the like, I assume?
Yes, and I'm sure that Bria Shea, who's on a later segment, might talk about retraining efforts that Excel has undertaken in regard to that. So, there are multiple dockets that are really important to have workers' voices included, whether that's, and the last one that I didn't mention, but is pretty obvious, I think, to those of us in here, is how do you ensure that workers' voices are in the regulatory decision-making process for the construction of clean energy? We do siting and routing decisions at the commission, and it is really important to us that, and we've been asking these questions of the developers or the utilities who are building these projects: are you using local labor? Where are those workers coming from? In Minnesota, we care that we want the workers to be from Minnesota. We don't want them to come from Texas or Florida. No offense to those states or anyone listening, but we want projects to impact and to help the economic development of our state of Minnesota. And Governor Walz and the Lieutenant Governor Flanagan have really helped lead discussions in this regard to say, yes, in Minnesota, we're undergoing a clean energy transition, but how do we make it Minnesota focused and Minnesota based, so that our different sectors of the economy benefit from our continuing overall goal to have an affordable and a reliable power system.
So, Pete, you helped design some of those.
Just
comment.
piggybacking off of some of the things that Chair Siebe just said. A couple of things. One, the IRA was in 2022. In 2023, the Minnesota legislature kind of followed suit with our own mini IRA and put some of our, financial resources to help also this energy transition, a lot of which were state resources going to leverage federal resources, including we set up a green bank and other programs like that. Where we are ahead of the feds is that we in 2024 passed permitting reform at the state level, and that was through the good work of the PUC, and Commerce was involved, and many stakeholders, and labor was a big part of that. The devil's in the details as we go to implement, but we are working on that. And I just want to acknowledge and give a shout out to labor for their role in that process, but also to say we set out to design a permitting system that can move faster without compromising the public input. And I think I'm optimistic that we got a good balance there. And if the federal folks want to give us a call, we're happy to share our story. So sometimes we lead and sometimes we follow. The other thing I would just say, which is slightly off of that topic, is the other benefit of the IIJA and the IRA is that we are building entire new industries that are utilizing the clean energy that we are rapidly moving to in Minnesota. We're kind of blessed that we don't actually have fossil fuels, so we don't have that legacy. So the move to Minnesota wind, Minnesota solar, Minnesota biomass is moving to homegrown, lower fuel cost energy system. But we're also backing that up with federal support. We have a hydrogen hub that we share with North Dakota that is funded by the DOE. Solugen just got a big Inflation Reduction Act DOE loan program office loan to use green energy and Minnesota biofeedstocks to make high value chemicals that are normally made outside the country and using fossil fuels. So we are taking this transition to clean and making it about building up Minnesota's economy. And the federal funding is really important for that.
Are you seeing an increase in quantity and quality of also community benefit plans?
This has been a big part of the DOE push because it was built into the IRA. And I think there was initially in our work with potential grantees, there was initial grumbling about why do we got to do this? But I think people are buying in, and I think we will get a lot of extra attention and a lot of results for communities that might not have happened without those federal requirements. So
I have to say, as a former administration person in the at the federal level, I think for the government, there's I think like everybody else, a lot to learn about how to implement the community benefit plans, but it's encouraging to see it getting some traction, at least. Turning back to Minnesota and your state policies, you have some pretty aggressive policies in terms of greenhouse gas reductions, in terms of electrification of transportation, for example. Maybe you could say a little bit about how that's going and also how it works, hopefully how it works hand in hand with things like the IRA.
Sure. Oh, no, Pete, you can go if you'd like, if you wanted to start.
Sure.
I was just flipping it around, that's all. So Pete, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, the fact we have a state mandate and these federal incentives, that synergy is really important. And, carrot and stick, one's coming at the state level, one's going at the federal level. But as we move to a clean energy system in Minnesota, there's a build out cost. I come from science, there's that activation energy. You got to get over that hump, even though the resulting, at least up to like 90% clean is definitely going to be cheaper on the other side. So it's important that we have that federal aid to help us with the important state mandates. And, our work with the PUC in implementing that law, is I think focused, and I think Cady and I, Chair Siebe and I are on the same page here about making sure we get those federal funds to reduce that activation energy cost and get us as quickly as possible to that cleaner system, which will be cheaper. So I think that is really important, that synergy.
Cady, you want to add to that?
I think Dr. Wyckoff did a good job of overall emphasizing the synergy between the federal IRA and the IIJA, and then what is happening on the ground in Minnesota. And I'll just give a little more flavor to that. First, the importance of continued investment in transmission cannot be understated. And there's varying like federal bills and consideration under that Congress is thinking about. But Dr. Wyckoff mentioned that in Minnesota, this last legislative session, the state passed a permitting reform bill that will help speed up our process particularly for transmission and solar and wind. And that is important because we are seeing that our infrastructure is aging and that there needs to be intense investment in transmission to help make the clean energy transition more reliable and quite honestly, more affordable. And so there are specific federal funding projects that are helping bring down transmission costs, whether that's the JTIQ investments, which are sort of over on the western side of the state, the Minnesota Power HVDC investment or DC line that that was mentioned earlier. There's $50 million invested into that from the feds. And then Xcel Energy's Form Energy Demonstration Project, which is iron air technology initiative that is being developed at the site of a retiring coal facility. And it also is the site of the Xcel Sherco solar project, which is the largest utility scale solar project in the Midwest that's under construction right now. Those are examples of how federal investment is really help make this transition more affordable. The next piece I want to mention is that although there is, significant need for investment in transmission, there also is increasingly the need and the desire, and I think it's happening very effectively, that states who often have varying climate statutes or varying climate legislation laws at the state level still need to continue to work together to ensure reliable service for the nation. And Minnesota, thanks to my colleagues and other colleagues on the commission and state regulators from the states that are not just surrounding Minnesota, but across the United States, are increasingly working cooperatively to say, what can states do to work together to help ensure we have a successful clean energy transition?
Mm-hmm. In fact, Cady, we all know that often in the United States, states have been in the lead. And it sounds like you're saying that, for example, on the permitting side, would that be a fair characterization of your statement?
Yes, Governor Walz was really instrumental in helping ensure that we passed permitting reform in Minnesota this last legislative session. And now I am hopeful that similar permitting reform will happen at the federal level so that we can help see these projects come online sooner.
And Pete, one last question. You mentioned earlier an electrolyzer factory. Can you say anything about how is hydrogen developing more broadly in the state? Is there some demand creation?
I think there's a lot of excitement, and I know we need to move on to the second part of the panel. I think there's a lot of excitement. I think it's been slowed a bit by the slow rollout of the tax credit guidance, but I think there's a tremendous potential. We have all this clean energy, and hydrogen is a hugely multi-useful tool for doing everything from decarbonizing how we make fertilizer for the farming western side of the state to how we make steel for the Iron Range up in the northeastern part of the state. And we have a big push with a SAF hub here in addition to our hydrogen hub. And all of these things are going to be predicated on us finding out how to deliver lots of clean electricity. And I think that's what Chair Siebe and I are charged with working together on in the state side, and you're about to hear from a bunch of our partners about specific projects.
Great. Well, look, we'd love to carry on, but I think we do have to move to the second panel. But Pete and Cady, thanks so much. It's very rewarding for us, frankly, to hear all of this progress being made along the lines of jobs, clean energy, and state leadership. So thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Adam to launch us into the second panel.
Thank you so much, Secretary Moniz. Chair Siebe and Dr. Wyckoff, was fantastic to have you. And we will now be having a roundtable discussion that is led by EFI Distinguished Associate Dave Foster, and will be featuring Jennifer Cady, who is the VP of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs at Minnesota Power, Bria Shea, who is the Regional VP of Regulatory Policy at Xcel Energy, Joe Fowler, who's a business manager at Laborers International Union of North America, and Rick Mardigan, who is the Executive Director at Building Strong Communities. Dave, off to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Adam. And thank you, Secretary Moniz, Pete Wyckoff, Cady, Siebe. Delighted to be here with all of you. So as Secretary Moniz said 2 years ago at EFI, we released our economic analysis of the jobs impact of the IRA. It showed at that time that during the 10 years from its passage in 2022 through 2032, that those investments were going to add an additional 1.5 million jobs to the American economy. The largest share of those jobs were going to be in the construction sector, with the second largest in the electric power sector. That's why I'm so pleased to have this discussion today with two of Minnesota's utilities and the representatives from the Laborers Union and Building Strong Communities, which works closely with the Minnesota building trades. From my point of view, these are the partners who can deliver high quality jobs in Minnesota, access to them for all of our communities, and meet the targets that Pete and Cady discussed earlier. So I am delighted to start, Bria, with you. Xcel Energy, as Cady Siebe mentioned, recently announced the largest solar project in Minnesota and one of the largest in the country at 420 megawatts. So why don't you start by telling us about that project and what made it possible?
Sure, yeah, glad to talk about this. One of my favorite and easiest topics to talk about. So thanks for having me and allowing me this opportunity. So the Shergo Solar Project initially came about actually during that COVID docket that Chair Siebe mentioned, when the commission asked utilities to bring forward projects that would drive investment and create jobs in the state. So Xcel Energy saw that opportunity, and we brought forward nearly $3 billion worth of investments and thousands of jobs across, I think it was about 11 projects. So among those projects were several of the wind repowering projects and a labor training program that I'll touch on briefly, but chief among them was our Shergo Solar project. So as we were preparing to retire our coal plant that is currently located there, it's 3 units, it's about 2,200 megawatts, and we've got plans to retire them. Actually, one's already retired and the rest will be brought off before 2030. We were thinking about those valuable interconnection rights and our existing infrastructure. And with the commission's request, we thought this is the right time to bring forward this large project that is literally replacing coal with renewable energy. Since that initial proposal, which was 2 projects, we've now added on to that with the commission's support and approval. And we are currently building 710 megawatts there. And we've got more solar and more storage being planned and still being brought forth. So a lot of work going on there. And in fact, the first 260 megawatts is slated to go into service, I think, next week. So we're on track, really exciting. In addition, just since we're talking about host communities and the IRA and the energy transition in general, since it ties really nicely at the Shergo site, thinking about the IRA, labor partnerships, and again, those host communities and our employees, and make sure we're hearing those local voices that Chair Siebe mentioned. In addition to the large solar project that we've got there, we also have an innovative long duration storage pilot that is 100 hours or 10 megawatts of storage. We also have hundreds of miles of transmissions line planned, including this Minnesota Energy Connection, which is a 180-mile line from our Shergo coal plant, where the solar facility is located, going all the way down to southern Minnesota. And along the way, we'll pick up thousands of megawatts of renewables and hopefully be anchored by a proposed gas plant that will not only anchor that long transmission line, but also provide stability to the system and be used as an emergency resource on our extreme Minnesota days. So then the last thing I want to highlight at the Shergo site that also Chair Siebe mentioned was, and also actually came about in the COVID docket, was related to this Power Up training program that we proposed, where we partnered with the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED, and 7 community-based organizations where we target and work with those traditionally underrepresented communities like people of color and women and veterans to train them for energy-related construction occupations. So the hope is that eventually those people will go work at Sherco Solar, though they certainly can work anywhere. We're just helping to get them into the energy and related fields. So with that, that's a little bit of what we're doing at Excel, and certainly highlights our work at Sherco and coal plant and solar plant now.
Well, thank you very much, Bria. That's a great story. And so now, Jennifer, I'd like to turn to you. And since many of our viewers are from outside of Minnesota, I thought it would be good if you started by explaining what Minnesota Power's service area is, where it's located, who your customers are, some of its unique characteristics, and how, as a result, you're approaching the energy transition there.
Thank you, David. All my favorite topics. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. If you're not familiar with us, Minnesota Power is an investor-owned utility serving northern Minnesota, and we are one of the most unique IOUs in the country because just a handful of large industrial customers represent nearly 70% of all of our annual energy sales. We serve a region known as the Iron Range, where 85% of American steel is born through mining operations. We also serve a number of wood products manufacturing operations like sawmills and paper mills. So forest products and taconite production are our top industries. Both are energy intensive and price sensitive. And much of that product is shipped out to the global market through the Duluth Seaway Port Authority here on Lake Superior. So a really special region serving really unique customers. But Minnesota Power has been leading the energy transition in Minnesota as we've moved from a generation portfolio that was 95% coal in 2005 to one that is the most renewable in the state today at 60%. We've decarbonized our system by closing 7 of our 9 coal units across northern Minnesota and investing in a diverse renewable portfolio of wind, solar, hydro, and biomass resources. At Minnesota Power, we strongly believe that an energy transition that leaves behind customers and communities is simply neither just nor sustainable. So the how of the energy transition is really critical to us, that we find ways to reinvest in our communities as we move forward. So you've heard Chair Siebe and Bria mention the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission Economic Recovery Docket, which we also participated in, and it was such a great opportunity to really think intentionally about investment. And so one of the examples of what Minnesota Power did is we brought forward a portfolio of solar projects that were intentionally developed and sited across our service territory to help our region recover from the pandemic. These 3 solar projects leveraged local union labor, but also locally produced solar panels from Helene that Dr. Wyckoff mentioned. And that facility is located in our service territory in Mountain Iron, Minnesota. And you heard earlier that they've been expanding. And so it's a good problem to have, that it's actually hard to get solar panels from them now because there's so much demand, which is fantastic for the state. And then through those projects, we implemented supplier diversity practices and preferences for the first time. So really used those projects as opportunities to maximize the benefits to the environment, to customers, to communities as we're reinvesting. And a super fun addition to those projects is we just partnered with a local farmer and we're using about 100 sheep to maintain excess vegetation around the panels so that our pollinators can thrive. And that's been a super fun local benefit here too. So really, we approach the energy transition as having to care for our customers who are very special, operating in a global marketplace, energy-intensive operations, while also, decarbonizing our system in a way that benefits the communities that we serve. So we really think about that transition thoughtfully and try to move in that direction.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It is truly a unique district and a unique story to hear it told that way. And I would now like to turn to the labor side of our equation, to Joe Fowler from the Laborers International Union. And I know from my own experience, Joe, that new technologies can almost always be disruptive to existing jobs, and yet you've been a leader in building these kinds of collaborations in Minnesota between labor and utilities and developers. How have you turned these disruptions into high-quality jobs? Tell us a little bit about your thinking and the laborers union strategy in this regard.
Thank you, David. Just sitting back and listening, I could echo so much of what some of the speakers from our first session and right now have said, because it is really about the relationships, and it goes back with both of the utilities here, both NP and Excel, formerly NSP, because our relationship goes back that long. And the communities are supported by both of these groups and others within the state. But it gets a little personal for me, specific to Excel. I actually live in Big Lake, reside there, which I go to the end of my lot, and I can look at the power plant stacks that are in the community next to me in Becker, and I can see Monticello nuclear plant from where I'm at. Can't quite see far enough north for MP, but our partnerships go back with both of them to building those facilities in the 70s and the 80s and et cetera, going on. Our union members from all of the different affiliated trades were a part of building their legacy here in Minnesota, and it's just emphasizing that with them at the same time they recognize it and saying, how do we make sure that those careers get to continue? You know, it's not, I don't want to say rare, but it's not necessarily common that folks within the construction industry get to go to the same job every day or the same location. That is a benefit that some of these folks that are currently working at the existing facilities, the fossil facilities, may not be able to continue doing. A lot of those jobs locally will be maintained, but our folks are the ones building it. Sherco as a great example. We have, from our trade specifically, we had over 100 members on that project at a given time, and even more as they keep expanding it. Different affiliates are out there as well, with operating engineers and iron workers, electricians, et cetera. Those benefits are the same folks that work within those facilities. I personally have worked in both Sherco and the majority of Excel facilities, as well as the nuclear side myself. That's where I started my career. So them recognizing that and building that into their resource plan as they try to transition to a clean energy economy that has been facilitated by both policy and legislation, a little bit carrot and stick, but from our side, we're there to provide a quality workforce, you know, with gold standard apprenticeships to meet all of those energy goals that they need our support and help with. There's opportunity there and new job opportunities to replace those old ones if people are willing to be retrained, and that's what we do. I mean, nobody's better at that than the affiliated trades with our registered apprenticeship programs. We have the gold standard. You know, and as it comes to the local side of it, you know, the PUC, Chair Siebe mentioned that earlier. We have commonality in that the PUC wants to see those job benefits go to local communities, because then the economic benefits that follow that typically are there. Our members are middle-class folks. They may take a vacation here and there if they get that opportunity, but the majority of those payroll wages are spent in the local communities, multiplying that economic benefit. The legislation that came out of Minnesota provides another real boost, and the tax benefits for the utilities to work with local labor, project agreements, utilizing registered apprenticeships. Those tax benefits make it an economic opportunity or a way to make it pencil out, per se, for the projects to happen. For labor, those economic benefits stay local. I mean, we cover a large area, all of Minnesota. We go into North Dakota where some of their other assets are as well. But those partnerships, when we can provide the local workforce, regardless of where it is, whether it's in a metro area or whether it's in a rural area, our members will cover the entire state. So we can provide that workforce to provide all of those opportunities for local workers for it to stay, the economic benefits to stay local, to transition our members that are working in those existing facilities over and retrain them for the new energy economy. And we can do it providing equity. Pete had talked about that as well. And actually Bria and Jennifer had as well, in regards to making sure that we provide those benefits to everybody where these facilities, these assets are being deployed or being constructed. And we are able to do that through what has up till very recently been a completely self-funded program through the building trades that's been nationally recognized. And I won't steal Rick's thunder here with Building Strong Communities, but that is the program that we can recruit for and provide the local workforce through for folks who haven't had those opportunities, whether it's women, BIPOC, or veterans. And Jennifer, thank you for your service. So from that side, I think we can help meet all of these goals. And I guess in all of those intersecting points that we talked about, we do it through partnership through the PUC, because we have similar goals: economic benefits, staying local, providing good paying jobs that, with health benefits. We have a reliable grid. We have a reliable energy system with the utilities that are represented here. Some top in class. I mean, you turn the lights on, they come on every time here in Minnesota for us. And it's because of the utilities and the reliability that they offer. And they aren't going to sacrifice that as they transition over, but it can't be done with a switch. It takes a little bit of time. And it's a little bit of back and forth between all of us, from the utility to the associations, the PUC, to labor, and to the actual communities that we work in, and our members live in. So that's a long-winded say. It takes it all together, policy-wise, to make it successful and to do it in a way that can meet the goals that are put forward by the state's legislation of 2040, 2050.
Great. Thank you, Joe. We're hearing a lot of common themes here, including a focus on collaboration, but also on building new partnerships during a time of change. And so that's a goal, I think, of the Biden-Harris administration, is that unions can play a pivotal role in accomplishing making sure that all communities are included in the benefits of the change that we're all pushing for. And that's why I'm especially excited to have Rick from Building Strong Communities, their executive director, a program that was started by the Minnesota Building Trades, talk about what that program is and how it is succeeding in reaching out to all communities. Rick?
Thank you, David, and thank you for having me. This is a pretty exciting panel. I've enjoyed listening to the discussion. Well, Building Strong Communities is a Minnesota community-based organization. We are statewide. We provide an industry-driven training, multi-trade apprenticeship program that focuses on preparing women, people of color, veterans, BIPOC, people of color, veterans for a career in the construction industry, and really to registered apprenticeship. And so we are looking to connect people opportunity to experience the construction industry and study it and make an informed choice. The program is 12 weeks long. It's primarily virtual. So we meet people where they're at. If they're working during the daytime, they have 8 weeks of virtual training. We do that with our partners, North Hennepin Community College, who delivers a 4-credit construction curriculum. It's 2 nights a week, 2 hours a night. We do it with our other partner, Twin Cities Rise, who helps prepare people for their professional life and for personal life by giving them a personal empowerment program, and gives them tools to address situations professionally and personally. We also partner with every single one of the JATCs, the Joint Apprenticeship Training Centers in the state of Minnesota throughout. As we said, we're a statewide program, meaning that we have opportunities in Duluth, Rochester, metro area, and out west. And so they get a chance to experience 4 to 6 weeks of hands-on experiences. So they really can get a full immersion into the industry. So for 8 weeks, we deliver a curriculum that gives them the opportunity to learn about every single one of the trades that are out there. site tours, mock interviews. We also provide an advocate, or some people call it a career navigator, to be with that person for the entirety of their training, meaning helping them mitigate any kind of the challenges that they have to help them get to that next stage of the training, which is the hands-on. And it doesn't end there. Once they complete our program, we help them mitigate any of the barriers a new person in the industry could have by providing them with a starter set of tools, maybe the initiation fee into the unions, anything that would help them stay in the opportunity as they become placed into the registered apprenticeship program that they've chosen. As I said, the first 8 weeks is really an immersion into the industry. We bring subject matter experts from every single one of the trades to talk about a day in the life of what it means to be an electrician or a laborer or a bricklayer, so that by the end of the 12 weeks, they've really considered every occupation there is and made that choice. Because really what we want to do is put them into an opportunity, but also keep them there. And so we really strive to immerse a person into the opportunity and the education that provides them with a solid footing as they enter their new career, and they like it when they're done with it. We partner with, we're stakeholder aligned. We work with community-based organizations. We'll talk about that just in a minute here as I talk about the Sherco Power Up XL program that we participated in this year. We participate with community-based organizations, career force centers throughout the state, secondary, post-secondary institutions, and other stakeholders that help us find people who are interested in a career in the construction industry. And so it's a very comprehensive approach to bringing people the opportunity, and whether that's in the northern part of the state or southern part of the state, wherever you're at, but really making sure that the opportunity to enter into this is there for you. And that being said, one of the we're funded by the state building trades affiliates, and we receive some funding from some state grants, which today we're here talking about the XL Energy Power Up program that funded 80 people through the BSC program last year. It was our largest cohort ever. We had a cohort of 125 people. Our cohort's made up 80% BIPOC. And we graduated this year 106 people from the 125, which is really an incredible amount. The individuals were able to take a site tour out at the Sherco plant. They interacted with different nonprofits in a construction introduction program before they came to the Building Strong Communities program. And so the individuals were very well prepared to enter into the industry as they completed what our program as well. So it's been phenomenal. The impact is incredible. As I said, 80% BIPOC for our program. And over the last 2 years, we have been blessed to place 109 people in 24 different occupations.
Wow.
Throughout the construction industry, and some right into the energy field. Some are working right now for XL or Blattner out at the Sherco site. So it's been a very, very exciting year. I've been with the program for 2 years. It is the best collection of practices in workforce development that I've been blessed to be a part of. I've been in for about 20 years.
Wow, those are very impressive results, Rick, and it's proof that collaboration can really deliver in ways that doing things alone can never accomplish. We're almost out of time, so I want to give both Bria and Jen 30 seconds to tell us about what the future holds with all the projects on your schedule. Bria?
30 seconds. Well, we've got a lot going on. I would just say we are, in addition to the renewables, we are pursuing the extension of our nuclear fleet, which are a critical part of our ability to meet Minnesota's clean energy standards. We're building hundreds of miles of transmission lines, and our next year we'll be proposing thousands of megawatts of wind, solar, and storage to the commission. And so, with the backdrop, all those efforts are focused on using local union labor, maximizing tax benefits, and keeping our system affordable and reliable. So thanks again for having me.
Great. Jen?
Yeah, thanks, David. So 30 seconds. Minnesota Power is really excited. We just announced 2 new solar projects totaling 200 megawatts that we're going to be bringing to the PUC for approval, and especially excited about one that is reinvesting at our Boswell Energy Center, our last remaining coal facility and the most geographically isolated rural generator in the state. So very similar to Sherco Solar, reinvesting with solar at the site of the Boswell plant, and look forward to beginning the PUC process on those projects soon.
Great. So I want to thank all our panelists very, very much for the contributions you've made to this important discussion, something that at EFI Foundation we want to carry on across the country, and would appreciate your continued support in our doing that. Now, I always like to fact check myself, and we did this important study 2 years ago, and I was curious what's actually going on in Minnesota. So I looked up what the QCEW U.S. Department of Labor was reporting about construction jobs and utility jobs in Minnesota. And I'm happy to report that we are over 4,000 new construction jobs richer today than we were 18 months ago. And we are over 1,000 new utility jobs richer than we were 18 months ago. And so the reality is that we're having real benefits from the IRA in Minnesota. And it's thankfully as a result of all the great work that all of you are doing together. And in my opinion, the fact that we've got this multi-layered collaboration between business, labor, regulators, and state government, that's how we win. So thank you very much. And Adam, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Jennifer, Bria, Joe, and Rick, it's been fantastic to have you. And we will now conclude with some additional wrapping up remarks from Dave.
Those were my wrapping up remarks, Adam. The only thing I would add to this is that we want to have this kind of discussion carried on in a vigorous manner all over the country, because we can do great things on the legislative level. And as Secretary Moniz mentioned, we had a close relationship with Pete Wyckoff in sharing our analysis with people in DC as we were looking at the value of something like the IRA. But at the end of the day, the message that the American people get on the value of things we do in legislation only gets valued if they really understand the benefits of what's happening. And I think far too many people don't get the opportunity to realize how what we all have been doing together, and you in Minnesota especially, have been proving that this kind of collaboration is what works. So we have an obligation to get this message out, and that's what we're so happy to have done with you today, and want your collaboration in going forward and doing more of it. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you all for joining us. We hope you will join us for our next Job Series webinar.